The scent of espresso and roasted garlic bread spread through the air of Vincent's, a modest old-style Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of Brooklyn. Yet beneath that familiar warmth lingered something denser and darker, the trace of expensive perfume, the soft measured footsteps of polished leather shoes, and a silent tension that clung to the skin like the chill before a storm. I was only a waitress, a shadow exhausted, broke once an elementary school teacher, before the budget cuts, now pouring wine and wiping tables, just to keep the electricity on. 4 months in this outdated restaurant. We had taught me 3 hard rules: never ask questions, never meet anyone's eyes, and never make yourself noticed. But that night everything changed. Conversations broke off mid-sentence, forks froze in mid-air. Even Rick, our hard-edged night manager, straightened his apron and looked up when he walked in. Michael Russo, a name spoken only in cautious whispers. A man with property scattered across the city, and rumors thicker than the marinara in the kitchen. Old money, old power, and a past no one dared to touch. He entered as if the street itself belonged to him, and perhaps it did. 2 men in tailored suits followed their sharp eyes and disciplined steps, carrying the unmistakable instincts of trained violence, and he took the table in my section. My hands trembled as I approached, still the invisible girl as always, until I was no longer invisible. His eyes, gray like cooled steel, sharp as a blade, swept over me and stopped. And in that instant something shifted. Minutes later, a woman in a red coat appeared from the side door, the staff-only entrance. She had not come for dinner. That much was clear from the soundless strike of her stilettos, and the effortless way the 3 men behind her moved their hands, always close to their sides where a gun would rest. She was Michael's ex-wife or something worse. And I, a nobody in worn sneakers with student debt still unpaid, did what no one else dared. I slipped a cocktail napkin from my apron, took up my capita dues, order pen, and scrawled 6 trembling words. Then I glided to his table and placed the small napkin beside his bourbon as if it were the bill. She is setting a trap. Leave now. 6 words. 6 words that changed everything. And suddenly I was no longer invisible. If at this very moment you are holding your breath as I did when I set that scrap of paper on the table at Vincent's, if your heart just pounded with every crash of shattered glass and every gunshot swallowed by the darkness, reach out and touch the subscribe button on our channel as a way of staying a little longer with this story. Like and share so those breathless moments can travel even farther. And if you are listening from some street corner of the city, from a small room, or from the deep stillness of midnight, let us know in the comments where you are, so that I may know my story has found you somewhere in this vast, wide world. The first sound was not a gunshot, but the crash of breaking glass. Someone had dropped a wine glass as the air in the restaurant thickened as if frozen mid-breath. I had just set the napkin down when my entire body stiffened. Michael had not yet looked at me again when his gaze slid past my shoulder, toward the side door where the woman in red had just entered. A nod so slight it was almost invisible came from her, a signal. The nearest man tugged lightly at the hem of his suit jacket, his hand pressed against his side, and I clearly saw the handgun tucked at his waist. I did not think I acted. Every survival instinct screamed through my blood. I turned and hurried toward the bar as if to get more water, but as my first step rang out, the gun fired. The bullet hissed through the air. The shrill screams of customers erupted, chairs were flung, tables crashed down, and the piercing sound of glass shattering across the stone floor. I dove behind the bar, slid across the cold ground, and found shelter beneath a low liquor shelf, my heart pounding like a war drum. For the first few seconds I could hear nothing but the pulse in my ears and my own breath. Someone shouted, "Lie down," from somewhere behind me. Then more gunfire, a long burst. I covered my ears, fought not to scream. My whole body curled inward. I heard Michael's voice, not loud, not shouting, but clear and steady, issuing orders to someone, whether subordinates or bodyguards I could not tell. Something heavy fell nearby, perhaps a body. Someone ran past the bar. I did not dare lift my head. I held my breath. A few seconds later, leather shoes struck the floor step by step, drawing closer, then stopped. I thought I was about to die, but the footsteps turned away, ran farther off. In a brief instant, I saw a shadow pass across the narrow gap beneath the shelf, too fast to recognize a face, but I saw the glint of steel in his hand, a gun. One more shot rang out, then silence. No one was screaming anymore, only the rustle of movement, someone sobbing softly, and the smell of blood mingled with wine and garlic powder. I did not move until I heard Rick shout, "Everyone okay? Is anyone hurt?" Only then did I dare lift my head from hiding. What lay before me looked like a shattered painting, tables and chairs, overturned glass, smashed food scattered everywhere, and in the far corner 2 men were being restrained by the restaurant's security, their hands bound with belts. A woman in red was gone. Michael was gone as well, as if he had never been there at all. I stood up in a daze, my legs shaking as if they could no longer hold my weight. Rick ran over, his face ashen, his hands smeared with blood. I did not know. "Who's Claire? Are you okay?" All I could do was shake my head. I could not speak. My eyes searched the room as if seeking something that could pull me out of this nightmare. Michael was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped away in the chaos. Of course he had someone like him. I looked down, never stayed trapped. I looked down. At the floor, the slip of paper with the 6 words I had written. It was still there, stained with a splash of red wine like blood. No one noticed it, and no one noticed me. The police arrived a few minutes later. Red and blue lights flickered across the windows, reflecting in puddles and broken glass. I was taken to the back for examination. A paramedic touched my wrist to check my pulse. Ice cold. I was not injured, but I knew I was no longer the same person. Someone whispered the name Michael Russo as the police asked questions, yet no one had seen anything. No one remembered anything. The only story was that a group of strangers attacked the restaurant, and a mysterious man vanished like smoke. No one mentioned me. No one asked why I had been beneath the bar just before everything exploded. I should have felt relieved to be alive. But deep inside, I felt one thing more clearly than anything else: I had been pulled into something far greater than myself, and I would not be able to walk away easily. I left Vincent's near dawn, my body still trembling with every heartbeat, my hands frozen cold even though I had zipped my coat to my chin. The police released me after nearly 3 hours of questioning without any useful answers. I played my role perfectly, an ignorant waitress who hid under the bar when it all happened. They did not suspect me because I was too ordinary to matter, and that made me even more uneasy. The streets of Brooklyn at this hour were eerily empty. No cars, no shop lights, only the pale yellow of street lamps casting my broken shadow across the cracked sidewalk. I walked home because I had no money for a taxi, and because I felt the need to stay as far from anyone who might know who I was. Every step made me glance over my shoulder. I was no longer sure what frightened me more, what had already happened or what had yet to come. The apartment I rented was on the 3rd floor of an old building with wooden stairs that creaked with every step. I slid the key into the lock with shaking hands. The door shut behind me with a dry click that gave me 1 second of relief before I locked 3 bolts, pulled the latch, and even wedged an old wooden chair beneath the doorknob out of blind instinct. Only when I turned on the light and saw everything still in place did I dare release a long breath. The apartment was barely more than 20 square meters, with a worn folding bed, a half-broken electric stove, and a window facing the brick wall of the neighboring building. But at least it was where I knew I was still alive. I slumped down against the door, knees drawn tight to my chest, arms wrapped around myself. I did not cry. I just sat there, eyes wide in the darkness, listening to every sound outside as if each passing car and closing door carried an invisible threat. I did not sleep that night. Every time my eyes drifted shut, the image of the gun, the screams, the blood-stained slip of paper replayed, like a film that could not be stopped. I tried not to think of Michael Russo, not to think of the blade's sharp look in his eyes, not to think of the woman in red and the silent killing signal she sent with nothing more than a nod. But I did think, and the harder I tried to forget, the clearer it all became. The next morning, the first light streamed through the window and stung my eyes. I dragged myself upright, splashed water on my face, made a cup of instant coffee, and sat on the plastic chair by the window as I did every morning. But this time something was different. I looked down at the narrow street below where a few people were pushing carts or walking their dogs when my gaze settled on a car. It did not belong to a neighbor. It was not a car I had ever seen parked here before. A sleek black sedan with windows so dark that even light could not pierce them. It was spotless, without dust, scratches, or anything that matched the worn disorder of this neighborhood, and it was parked directly in front of my building. My heart slammed hard. I stepped away from the window, drew the curtain, and moved to the center of the room, trying to calm myself. Maybe it belonged to someone who got lost. Maybe it was just an Uber driver who had fallen asleep. But I knew it was not. The feeling from the night before returned. That feeling of being watched through smoke and laughter, the feeling of realizing you are standing between two worlds, neither of which wants you to exist for long. I checked the door locks again, turned off the light, and sat down on the floor, hugging my knees, my heart pounding as if someone were knocking at the door with its rhythm. I did not know what would happen next, but I knew that if that car was there because of me, then everything was only just beginning. I did not leave the apartment all that morning. The black car remained parked in front of the building, like a cold reminder that I was no longer part of the ordinary world. By noon, I had drifted into a shallow sleep on the floor. My body curled tight with cold and fear. When I woke, the sun was already high, and 3 steady knocks sounded at the door, unhurried yet impossible to ignore. I froze, my heart racing, afraid to answer, but then a man's voice sounded calm and low, speaking my full name, Claire Bennett. He did not raise his voice, only spoke loudly enough for me to hear through the door. No one in this neighborhood knew my full name. I sat up, my legs numb, and peered through the peephole. A bald man in a black suit stood there, his face expressionless. He carried no visible weapon, at least none in sight, but his eyes told me he was not someone to negotiate with. I did not open the door, and he seemed to know that. He spoke one sentence and stepped back. "Mr. Russo would like to see you. The car is waiting downstairs." Then he turned and walked down the stairs without looking back. I stood motionless for several minutes, then looked out the window again. The black sedan was still there. The man opened the rear door and waited, as if he already knew I would come down. I do not know what made me open the door. Curiosity, fear, or the part of me that understood this was not something I could avoid. I put my coat back on, slipped into my worn sneakers, and went down the stairs. The man said nothing as I approached, only gave a slight nod, opened the car door, and let me step inside on my own. The interior was soft like velvet, scented with real leather and mint. The door closed, sealing in absolute silence. The car glided forward so quietly I had to look outside just to be sure I was still in the city. When it stopped before a luxurious high-rise in Manhattan, I hesitated. The man gestured for me to follow and led me through the lobby, where suited staff bowed slightly, but asked no questions. A private elevator opened and we stepped inside. He pressed the top floor button when the doors opened. I nearly died. I stopped breathing as I stepped out. The penthouse looked like it belonged in an expensive interior design magazine. Glass walls wrapped around the space, revealing the city skyline. Polished wooden floors, minimalist furnishings, elegant to the penthouse point of suffocation. And he was there, Michael Russo, no longer in last night's suit. Today he wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, yet his presence had lost none of its weight. His steel gray eyes met mine, not as cold as I remembered, but holding something quieter, more complex. "Thank you for the paper," he said, as if offering a greeting, his voice low with a faint rasp, like a man who had not slept. I did not know what to say. I just stood there, gripping my bag strap. He stepped closer, not too close, but near enough for me to feel the gravity of him. "You saved me," with 6 words and a glance. "Now it is my turn." I opened my mouth to refuse, but he raised a hand. "You do not understand, Claire. The moment you wrote those words, you were pulled into this game. They will not leave you alone, and I do not allow anyone else to touch the person who saved my life." I shook my head. "I do not want to be involved in anything. I just want to live normally." He gave a small nod, as if he had expected that. "And that is exactly why you need me, not to become someone else, but to survive." He held out his hand, not forceful, not commanding, yet there was something in his eyes that could not be denied. I looked at that hand. I thought of the black car, the icy gaze of the woman in red, the gunfire and blood of last night, and knew my world had shattered into fragments. I reached out and took his hand, beginning something I had never imagined, yet knowing for certain there would be no way back. I sat in silence in the vast marble-floored living room, my palms still damp with tension. Michael stood with his back to me, looking out through the glass at the city, stretching like a glittering map of lights. He did not speak at once. The room was so quiet I could hear the wall clock counting each second into the air. When he finally spoke, his voice no longer carried coldness but deliberation, almost sincerity. "You have 2 choices, Claire." He turned to face me, his eyes still knife-sharp, but softer than the first time I saw them. "1, I take you out of New York. You disappear, new identity, new life. No one will know who you are. I will guarantee absolute safety. But from that moment on, you can I never return. You can never see anyone from your past. Never contact anyone who ever knew you as Claire Bennett. You will have to die in legal records." I looked up, my heart tightening. "You mean I would have to fake my death?" He nodded to this. "The world, you would no longer exist. Not a single person. Not even your Family would be allowed to know you are alive. I swallowed, my throat dry as sand. And the second choice, Michael walked slowly to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a glass of bourbon, then did not drink it, only held it. Stay under my protection. You remain yourself, living here in this world, but in return, you follow my rules. I frowned. What rules? He lifted the glass, the ceiling light catching the dark amber liquid, then set it down in front of me. No questions, no acting on your own, no betraying my trust, and you must learn how to exist in my trust purpose. The world, he said slowly, each word falling like a weight onto the paws. Marble, beside me is not the safest place, but it is the only place where you can still choose your own future. I was silent, feeling every sound around me smothered into nothing. One path meant erasing myself from everything I had ever known. The other meant stepping fully into the world whose darkness I had only briefly glimpsed. You are the only one who ever warned me without wanting anything in return. Michael continued, his voice deepening as if it carried an entire burdened past. To them you are a weakness, but to me you are something different. I lifted my head and met that gaze. It was not the look of a man repaying a debt, but the look of someone who had made a decision long ago I did not know how to answer. Part of me wanted to run, to vanish and start over. But I had been running my whole life from failure, from poverty, from responsibility. This time I did not want to run, I wanted to understand. And what was happening? I wanted to claim my life, even if only in some small way. I drew in a deep breath and looked straight into his eyes. If I choose to stay, what happens first? Michael did not smile. He only lifted his glass slightly and nodded, as if confirming something he had expected. You will move to a secure apartment guarded 24 hours a day, and you will begin learning the things you need to survive in my world, including that you will no longer be a teacher or a waitress. I nodded, though fear still filled me, but this time I did not hide. I looked at Michael without avoiding his gaze. I choose to stay. He raised his glass toward me in a silent welcome, and in that moment I knew one door had closed forever behind me, but another had opened, leading into a world I had never imagined I would enter. I moved into the new apartment the following morning. While the city was still asleep, the black car was already waiting beneath the building. The driver said nothing, and the same bodyguard from before stood there holding a clipboard of documents. Everything had been prepared. I was allowed to return to my old apartment for only 15 minutes, to gather a few essential personal items. Things like identification, old photos, and my phone contacts were taken without explanation. Everything that belonged to the former Claire Bennett would be packed away and stored somewhere I was not permitted to know. They brought me to a high-rise building beside Central Park, where every footstep echoed on polished stone floors, where elevators were operated by attendants. And the scent in the air was a blend of French perfume and immense wealth. The apartment was on the 18th floor with 3 glass walls, overlooking a city that never stopped moving. The living room alone was as large as my entire old apartment, with snow-white sofas and carpets, so thick I could not hear my own footsteps. The kitchen was open, spotless, not a speck of dust. A bedroom had sliding doors, pristine white sheets, and automated curtains. Everything was so clean it made me feel out of place, as if even breathing too hard might shatter the space. A woman named Lena was assigned as my primary contact. She appeared just minutes after I arrived, wearing a cream-colored Eneris place. Suit her hair neatly tied, her voice quick and sharp. She gave me a full tour of the apartment, listed regulations, schedules, the security system, access codes, and surveillance cameras in every corner of the ceiling. I listened, but was not sure I absorbed it all. My head felt submerged in thick cotton. Lena left me alone in that sterile perfection. I dropped onto the sofa and stared at the ceiling. I was supposed to feel safe. This apartment had round-the-clock security, state-of-the-art alarms, and an untraceable location. I had food filling the cabinets, new clothes in the wardrobe, and a fully encrypted phone strictly for security contact. Yet I felt like a fledgling bird kept in a gilded cage. I was not allowed outside without permission. I could not call anyone, post anything, or reach the world at all. I was completely cut off. And strangely, what unsettled me most was not the control but his presence in every corner of my thoughts. Michael Russo. The man he should have feared, the man who had entered the restaurant like an Armani-clad ghost, carrying the scent of blood and power. Yet when I saw him the second time in a white shirt with his exhaustion visible in his eyes, I sensed something else. Loneliness. Part of me wanted to keep my distance. Another part drove my curiosity to madness. I spent the entire day by the glass, watching the streets below my mind, spinning with questions. Why was I chosen? Why did he not let me go? What was it about 6 hastily written words that made a man like him intervene? And if he truly was, as they rumored, then who exactly was I beside? That night I could not sleep. The city lights reflected across the bedroom ceiling, casting formless streaks of glow. I lay on my side, eyes wide, listening to the silence of the luxury apartment and thinking of everything I had left behind. The elementary school teacher who once dreamed of a small suburban classroom, the clumsy waitress who blushed too easily, none of them existed anymore. Now there was only me, a different version without a name, without a shape, and a quiet question tapped steadily in my chest like a clock. Was I being protected or imprisoned, and for what reason? I still did I not know I was awakened at 8 in the morning by the firm ring of the doorbell and a voice from the intercom announcing through the security system that a woman named Margot had arrived by appointment. I had never heard the name before, but before I could respond, the door opened. A tall woman with razor-sharp platinum bob hair stepped inside as if she were the true owner of the place. Her black dress hugged her frame eyeliner sharp as a blade, and the luxurious French perfume declared she never shared a world with ordinary people. "You are Claire?" she asked, without waiting for an answer, her eyes sweeping over me. Loose t-shirt faded, leggings, hair carelessly tied. She released a faint sigh like a verdict. "We have much to do." She was not one for detours. That very morning, a rolling rack of clothes was pushed into the living room, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying shoeboxes, leather bags, earrings, perfume, and dozens of outfits from designers whose names I had only seen in fashion magazines at the neighborhood hair salon. I was pulled into the dressing room, trying on one outfit after another, turning in every direction before a full-length mirror, while Margot and her assistants took notes. Seams, cuts, silhouettes, nail color, button placement. Every detail was corrected as if preparing for a runway show. After 3 hours of fittings, I was told to sit for breakfast. But before I lifted my fork, Margot tapped the table lightly, fixing her gaze on mine. "Not like that. Never sit at a table without knowing how to place your napkin. Never hold cutlery like you are about to chop meat in a school cafeteria." I flushed, but she did not soften. "You will not simply dine with the rich. You will dine with the powerful, and they will judge if you within the first 3 seconds." She began instructing. Every small movement, how to sit back in the chair, how to cross my legs, how to look into another's eyes with just enough interest without making them feel threatened, how to choose the correct glass from the 3 or 4 at a formal table. Every gesture had a reason, every glance a purpose. I was taught how to speak, how to keep my voice low and clear, never rising at the end of a sentence so as not to sound anxious or weak. They taught me how to walk through a crowd without being pushed aside, how to greet a politician differently from a businessman, how to decline an invitation without offending. Margot was not kind, but she was effective. In less than 3 days, I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. I did not just dress better, I existed differently. My shoulders were straighter, my gaze no longer fled, my steps no longer hesitated. I still stumbled over words, laughed at the wrong moments, but I felt something changing, not only on the outside, but in how I saw myself. During short breaks between fittings and walking drills, I began to quietly ask Margot about Michael. She always answered with half a sentence or a fleeting look. But one afternoon, as I stood on the balcony practicing posture while holding a glass of wine, Margot approached with a glass of lemonade, sat beside me, and spoke without being asked. "Michael does nothing by chance. He chose you because you dared to do what no one else would. But do not misunderstand. He never keeps anyone beside him if they are not strong enough." I remained silent, looking down at the street far below, feeling my old shell slowly peel away piece by piece. I still did not know what awaited me ahead, but I now understood one thing. Clearly, I was no longer the waitress, Claire Bennett, and I was certain Michael Russo had never put anyone through this kind of training, simply because of a 6-word note. That night, for the first time, I stepped beyond the glass walls of the high-rise apartment. Michael arrived to escort me precisely on time without notice, simply appearing in the doorway in a perfectly tailored black suit and a silver-gray silk tie that sharpened the forged steel coldness of his gaze. He said nothing as I emerged from the dressing room, wearing the jade satin dress Margot had chosen, with such precision, clinging to my curves and revealing just enough of my shoulders to draw attention without slipping into overt seduction. His eyes moved over me slowly in a silent evaluation before he gave a small nod, as though approving a piece of art for exhibition. In the car, he spoke only briefly about the event. A charity art auction hosted by the Castellano family gathering nearly the entire power elite of Manhattan from tycoons and politicians to artists and financial titans. I nodded, hiding my tightly clenched hands in my lap, as every lesson Margot had drilled into me raced through my mind like a rewound score. Every gesture, every greeting, how long to hold a gaze, how far to let a smile linger. When the car halted before a long red carpet blazing beneath flashing cameras, Michael murmured by my ear without turning his head, "They will look at you, do not look down, and do not forget who you are walking beside." I drew a deep breath and stepped out into the storm of camera shutters. Michael offered his hand and I placed mine into his, matching his stride as though I had done so all my life. Inside the main hall was another world, thick with the perfume of wealth, the delicate clink of crystal, rising in invisible waves. Priceless paintings lined the walls under carefully cut light as though inside a private museum. Everyone was dressed as if born to belong here, and I felt the first scanning stares pass over me like X-rays. Women assessed me with glacial calculation. Men looked at me as an unsolved question. I was not the woman they were used to seeing at Michael Russo's side. Nor was I the type familiar to this world. I reply was the variable, and I felt it in every step. Yet I did not bow my head. I kept my back straight, my eyes forward, my hand resting on Michael's arm. He introduced me only as Claire, without title, without label, and that only sharpened their curiosity. For more than an hour I was led from one circle to another, from gallery owners to real estate CEOs, from senators to shadowed collectors whose names existed only in private journals. I began to speak, guided by what I had been taught, my voice soft but not weak, my smile timed with care, listening and replying just enough to be remembered, yet never enough to be judged a threat. When we reached the auction floor, the lights softened, and I saw a deep blue oil painting I remembered from an art history book in college, and I spoke the artist's name before I could stop myself, then quickly glanced at Michael. He said nothing, only the faintest curve touched his mouth as though noting something. When the first gavel struck, silence fell. Yet I still felt a gaze from the far corner of the hall. A dark-haired woman in wine red watched me as if she had known me for years. I turned away before our eyes met, but my heart had already slipped a beat. I did not know what tier of the world I had stepped into, but I knew there was no retreat, and every gaze tonight no longer saw me as a novice, but as a player who had taken a piece and stepped onto the board. When the auction lulled after the final sequence of strikes, the guests dispersed into side salons to drink, converse. Michael was drawn aside by an investor, leaving me near a display of white marble sculpture. Before I could examine it closely, a powerful scent of jasmine and black pepper cut through the air, and a voice, silk soft yet ice-cold, spoke. "You are Claire, yes?" I turned. It was her, Isabella. Up close, she was even sharper than memory. Porcelain white skin, immaculate. Crimson lips, pale. Gray eyes like drawn graphite. The red dress fit her without a wrinkle. Her posture without a flaw. One hand resting lightly on a martini glass, the other poised at her hip, as if she could strike or end someone with words. Alone, I nodded, steadying my face. "And you are," she smiled without warmth. "No need to introduce myself, Claire. You know who I am, just as I know you. I am very good at finding women who sit where they do not belong." I swallowed but did not lower my gaze. Isabella stepped closer, her appraisal slow from head to toe. The dress. Margot chose the shoes. Margot chose the walk. Margot trained, but my eyes were mine, and I used them to look straight back at her. "Perhaps you are used to being the only woman in the room who draws attention," I said quietly, neither arrogant nor retreating. Isabella set her glass down and tilted slightly as though savoring my innocence. "You think this is a game? You think Michael brought you here because of sentiment? In this world no one acts without reason." "Claire, I know," I answered, and for the first time felt heat rise into my throat. "But I also know he does not keep anyone beside him unless he chooses to." Isabella laughed short and razor-sharp. "You are right and naive. You have never seen Michael when he is pushed to the wall. I stood at his side when blood splashed his sleeve, when an entire empire nearly collapsed because of one phone call. You think 6 words on a scrap of paper grant you a place beside him. You do not know him," she spoke, slowly pouring poison into each word. I said nothing, my pulse unsteady, yet my face composed. Isabella tilted her head as if waiting for my final fracture, then stepped back, reclaiming her glass. "We will meet again, Claire. Perhaps next time you will wear black." The words hung in the air like a silent indictment as she disappeared into the crowd without a glance. When Michael returned, his eyes passed over my face for a single second, and I knew he had understood what had occurred. Yet he did not ask. He merely extended his hand, leaving my choice to me. I placed my hand into his, though the chill of that encounter still echoed in my bones. I knew I had just looked into the eye of the storm, and this time it wore no gun nor threat, only a woman who knew how to kill without drawing blood, and I also knew this game had only just begun. The car left the event in silence, with only the faint hiss of tires gliding over the damp night road. I sat beside Michael, my hands still cold as stone, my mind echoing every word Isabella had spoken, like needles piercing the thin layer of perfited delighted confidence Margot had painted over me. Michael said nothing. Throughout the drive, his eyes fixed forward, his jaw tightened as if grinding through something heavier than everything that had unfolded that night. When the car stopped in the underground garage, he did not wait for the driver as usual, but stepped out himself, opened my door and met my gaze for a brief second. Upstairs to the penthouse, we need to talk. I followed him, my heartbeat hammering wildly in my chest. The apartment was quiet, as if the outside world had never existed. No music, no soft lighting, only the pale, white glow of ceiling, lights washing over the cold wooden floor. Michael removed his jacket, hung it on the hook, and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. One was placed in front of me. He sat down, not directly opposite, but at an angle, resting one hand on the arm of the sofa. Claire, you need to understand one thing. Tonight you are no longer an outsider, and not only because you walked beside. I tightened my grip on the glass, my breath catching in my throat. He looked straight at me, his eyes no longer cold but grave. You are my weakness, and in this game, weakness is the most expensive currency. Isabella will not stop at a conversation. She always plays in ways that make others lose control. You have just become the bait. I swallowed hard. The liquor had not yet touched my lips, but my chest already burned. He spoke as if I had signed a fatal contract without knowing it. I whispered, "Then why did you bring me there? Why not keep me hidden at home like a faceless reserve piece?" Michael gave a quiet laugh with no trace of ease. "Because you are not a pawn. You are the only variable they cannot predict. I need your presence. I need them confused. I need them questioning. I need you to distract them. And that means you are standing in the eye of the storm." He rose and moved a few steps as if to scatter the thoughts crowding his mind, then turned back to me, his voice lower now, almost an apology. "I did not intend to push you into danger, but I cannot protect you if you do not know where you are. This is no longer the story of 6 scribbled words on a napkin. This is a real game, and Claire, I do not play to lose." I sat motionless, feeling as though a thin layer of skin were being stripped away. I was no longer the invisible girl wiping tables at Vincent's, no longer a chance intruder in a world that did not belong to me. I was part of it. Whether I wished it or not, I lifted my head, my voice quiet but steady. "Then from now on, what must I do?" Michael studied me as if weighing 2 paths, then stepped closer and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You will learn not only how to survive, but how to command the space you enter. You will not only be my companion, you will become the one they cannot look away from, and I will be the one who ensures you are not torn apart because of it." I nodded, though turbulent waves still churned inside me. I was not sure I was strong enough, not sure how far I could go, but I knew that after tonight, turning back was no longer an option, and if I had to stand in the heart of the storm, I would learn how to walk without being swept away. 3 days after the auction, when breakfast had just ended and Michael was fastening the cuff of his shirt in the living room, I stepped in front of him, my heart pounding like a war drum, yet my eyes did not blink. "I want to learn how to shoot." I looked up at me for a moment, as if doubting what he had heard, then raised a brow. Why? I kept my voice steady. "Because I do not want to be someone who only needs protection. If I truly stand in the middle of the game, as you said, I need to know how to defend myself." A woman pushed onto the board without a weapon is only an excuse for others to strike. I have seen the look in Isabella's eyes. I know what is coming. He was silent for a long time, then set aside the cufflink, removed his watch, took out his phone and sent a short message. An hour later, we were in a room deep beneath the building with no windows, low ceiling, and cold fluorescent light. A long table displayed an orderly array of handguns. Beside it lay protective headphones, visors, and a shooting target at the far end. Michael stood beside me, arms crossed. "Are you sure once you hold a gun, you will no longer stand outside the boundary?" I nodded. He stepped to the table, selected a compact, Glock disassembled and checked it, then returned and placed it in my trembling hand. The metal was icy, heavier than I expected. Michael stood behind me only a few centimeters away. He placed his hand over mine, gently tightening to steady my posture. He adjusted my index finger onto the trigger and murmured close to my ear, "Never place your finger on the trigger unless you are ready to fire." My eyes could not help drifting to the mirror ahead. We were reflected like an implausibly matched pair in a dangerous play, a cold, composed man and a woman, learning to master fear. He adjusted my stance, nudged my hips back slightly for balance. My gaze met his in the mirror, and he did not look away. I swallowed his breath, brushed the nape of my neck as he whispered, "Do not think of it as a tool for killing. Think of it as a tool for surviving. Aim at the center of the chest. Hold your breath. Squeeze." The first shot thundered in my ears. I flinched but did not drop the gun. Michael let out a faint smile. "Good. Continue." Another shot, then another. With each shot, his hand remained on mine, keeping me from drifting off target. I felt the tension in his body, but also his steady breath like an anchor in rising waves. After about 20 minutes, I began to control the recoil. The bullets started striking closer to the center instead of veering left. My breathing was ragged. Sweat beaded on my forehead, yet my eyes never left the target. When I lowered the gun, Michael took it from my hand, set it back on the table, then turned to face me. "I think I am starting to like this feeling," I said, half in jest, half in truth. He looked at me, not smiling, but his eyes softened. "Not because of the gun, but because you are beginning to believe you can control something. That is the first step." I gave a small nod, then stepped closer to the target board, studying the scattered bullet marks with a few near the center. Not perfect, but a beginning. When I turned back, Michael was still there, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on me. "Thank you," I whispered. He stepped closer, his eyes holding that same intensity. "Do not thank me. Thank yourself for choosing not to live as a shadow." In that moment, amid the lingering echo of metal and the sharp scent of gunpowder in the air, I realized I had taken another step out of my old fragile safety. I was no longer learning only to survive. I was beginning to learn how to fight, and with Michael standing just behind me, I knew that no matter how fierce this battle became, I would not retreat. I began to sense that something was wrong on Monday morning when the driver took me to the public library so I could change the atmosphere and read for a while. The black SUV behind us followed for nearly 14 full blocks, changing lanes. When we changed, stopping at red lights and keeping just enough distance not to raise suspicion if one was not alert. But I had learned how to observe since my first shooting lesson. I was no longer the woman I used to be. I had grown accustomed to the feeling of being watched, but this time it was different. I told the driver to turn back without stopping at our original destination. The moment I stepped into the private elevator of the building, I saw an envelope stuck to the door of the apartment. With no sender, no recipient inside, was a photograph of me at the auction, standing beside Michael, our teen Joe, gazes almost touching. In a fleeting instant beneath it were 6 typed words cut from magazines. "Every choice has a blood price." My hand tightened until the edge of the paper cut into my skin. I gave the letter to Michael just as he came out of the study. The busy look on his face vanished instantly. He replaced by something utterly cold. He studied the photo carefully, then turned and made a phone call, his voice low like a storm threatening to break. Within 2 hours, the entire security system of the building was recalibrated from the ground up. All entry locks were replaced with new biometric codes. Access cards were deactivated and reissued to every employee. Surveillance cameras were reprogrammed to track every movement on every floor. I was forbidden to go out unless escorted by at least 2 people. Everything changed at a dizzying speed. But that was not all that night. As I sat alone in the Miter's office, a living room holding a book, my eyes unable to focus, the door opened and a man entered with Michael. Tall, dark-skinned, a faint scar stretching from cheek to chin like an old slash. His eyes seemed to observe everything within a several 100-meter radius. "Claire, this is Marco. Michael said he will be responsible for your protection from now on." I looked at Marco, then turned to Michael, a personal bodyguard. "No," Michael replied, his gaze never leaving me. "Marco is not a bodyguard. He is the only person I trust enough to place my life in." I said nothing and gave a small nod. Marco stepped forward and shook my hand, his grip firm. The calluses in his palm spoke of his past. "It is a pleasure to work with you, Claire. I was not sure the word pleasure truly existed in his world, but I nodded politely afterward. Michael and Marco spoke privately in the study for a long time. A few words slipped through the door, crack phrases, like internal leak suspicion from Isabella, check every link. When they came out, neither said another word, but I understood everything was shifting. I was no longer someone being sheltered. I was becoming the reason the enemy would strike harder, and when Michael looked at me with eyes no longer only worried but tightly suppressed with anger, I knew this was no longer just about protection. He felt threatened, and no one threatens Michael Russo without paying a price. As night fell, I sat on the balcony, city lights shimmering like a million watching eyes. Marco stood a few steps away, silent, but his presence was a reminder that this world no longer allowed ambiguity. I tightened my grip around the cup of tea in my hand. If they thought I would be frightened into running, they had chosen the wrong woman, and if Michael trusted me enough to place me at the heart of the storm, then I would learn how to stand within the thunder without falling that night rain. I fell quietly against the towering glass windows of the penthouse, leaving long streaks like the marks of memories that could never be erased. I curled into a chair beside the fireplace, its warmth unable to dispel the chill inside my chest. Michael entered, his shirt still unbuttoned at the collar, a glass in his hand that he did not drink, his eyes fixed on the mist-veiled city. I thought he would remain silent as usual, keeping what he knew and what he felt locked away. But tonight, something changed. Do you know why I reacted so strongly when you saw that photograph, Claire? Not only because you were threatened, but because it forced me to remember something I tried to bury long ago. I lifted my head without speaking. He sat down across from me, leaning back as if finally setting down a burden he had carried for years. I once lost my family, not because the enemy was strong, but because someone I trusted betrayed me. That person was my cousin Luca. We grew up together like brothers. My father trusted Luca enough to give him control over part of the operation. I was young then, newly entering the game, too inexperienced to recognize the signs of betrayal. Everything collapsed in one night. A crucial shipment was exposed, an ambush was set. Assassins fired into the car carrying my father. I was not there at the time. I arrived 10 minutes too late, only long enough to see blood smeared across the glass and my father's body dragged from the vehicle like a broken object. Michael tightened his grip on the glass, the voice roughened. My mother suffered a heart attack 2 days later and did not survive. I lost them both in less than a week, and the worst part was discovering that Luca had sold them out. He took money from a rival faction, gave up the route. In exchange for a promise of power, I caught him myself, no one else, and I was the one who ended his life. But the truth is, from that moment on, I was no longer the man I had been. I trusted no one, not anyone. Until you appeared, I saw in you something I once had before the world turned cold: trust, instinct, the will to survive, and that terrified me. I feared you would vanish like they did, that one mistake, one soft moment, and I would lose yet another person that I... He stopped, unable to continue, but his eyes carried everything his words could not. I fell silent, my heart tightening as I pictured the young man Michael once was standing amid blood and betrayal, forced to become a man with no room left for weakness. I rose and moved closer, sitting gently beside him. Michael, you cannot protect everyone from this world, but that does not mean you must live forever inside armor. I am not Luca, and you are not alone. Anymore. He turned to look at me, his eyes heavy. I know that is what frightens me most, because once I allow someone to step in, I do not know if I am strong enough to lose them again. I placed my hand over his, my palm warm against the cold of the rainy night. I do not promise everything will be safe, but I promise I will not vanish easily, and if anything happens, I decide to stay, Jay. I want you to know, I entered this with full awareness, and by my own choice, we sat that way for a long time without speaking outside. The rain continued to fall steadily, like drops of the past being washed across the glass, but inside me, for the first time, I no longer felt like someone merely passing through his life. I was becoming part of it, and that was what made everything terrifying and at the same time profoundly worth living. The next morning, rare sunlight slipped through the curtains, casting soft golden streaks across the polished wooden floor of the silent penthouse. I woke later than usual, not from exhaustion, but because my heart was still tangled in the fiction. The weight of what had been spoken the night before Michael's story had not only etched itself into my mind, but had opened an emotional door I had long been afraid to touch. I walked barefoot across the cool floor, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat on the balcony overlooking the entire city. The morning wind brushed lightly through my hair, carrying the scent of moisture and the strange stillness of a rare, peaceful morning beneath a storm that continued to coil unseen below the streets. Cars began to move as if nothing were wrong, yet inside me everything had changed. I was no longer the Claire who once walked into Vincent's in a worn uniform with nothing but a small dream of survival. I had fired a gun, stood beneath probing stares, faced threats and mortal secrets, and now I was here in the home of a man whom the world both feared and distrusted, feeling his presence not only beside me but slowly seeping into every corner of my thoughts. Michael appeared behind me. As quietly as always, he sat down next to me without a word, lifted my coffee cup from my hand, took a sip and returned it. That small, unexpected gesture drew a smile from me. He looked at me, the faintest curve touching his lips. "You smiled." I nodded. "Does it surprise you that I can still smile in all of this?" "Very surprising, but also real. I feel myself changing every day, stronger, sharper, yet sometimes I look in the mirror and do not recognize myself anymore. I wonder what I am doing here in a world that does not belong to me, amid power games and bloodshed. I once thought I was an outsider. Now I am not so." "Sure." Michael was silent for a moment, then said, "You are still you, Claire, but you are the version that circumstance has forced to grow up. You are not lost. You are adapting, and no one adapts unless there is strength inside." He stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." I took his hand, its warmth a true anchor, and we left the penthouse without announcing anything, with only a single escort vehicle and Marco at the wheel. Our destination was a small park hidden behind a row of old buildings where the elementary school Michael and Luca once attended had stood. He told me of skipping classes to run to a river of fighting and throwing books at each other, then reconciling with locked arms, his voice lighter than usual, carrying regret, interwoven with memories that had faded into dust. I listened and realized I no longer saw him merely as a symbol of power. I was seeing him as a man with real wounds, and that made me feel my own heart opening without resistance. For the first time on the way back, as the car stopped at a red light, Michael reached for my hand, not to protect, but to connect, a wordless admission that amid all the chaos we had found one another that night. When I looked into the mirror again, in the dim yellow light, I saw a Claire who no longer trembled in fear, but a woman learning to walk a dangerous path with her chin lifted and eyes wide. And when I returned to the living room where Michael was waiting, I knew I did not need to ask anymore. I knew I was here not because I had been forced, but because I had chosen to stay. For strength is not born only of holding a weapon, but of daring to let one's heart beat in a world that seems to have no room for love. That afternoon, while I was reviewing the week's schedule with Margot in the dressing room, Marco entered without knocking, his face so tense that both of us rose at once. "Claire, Michael needs you in the study immediately." I looked at Margot. She nodded slightly, her expression suddenly grave. I followed Marco down the long marble corridor, my heart racing for reasons I could not name. When I entered, Michael stood with his back to the window, his phone dark in his hand. Without looking up, he said, "Close the door." I did. The air in the room felt heavy, as if a storm were forming within four walls. Michael turned his gaze. No longer held the softness of the morning, but the cool, the vigilance of a man about to enter battle. He set the phone on the desk, pointing to a coded message. "Isabella is working with a West Coast organization. They plan to take me out at the Castellano Charity Gala this Friday." My hands tightened. A chill swept up my spine. The Castellano event gathered the highest-ranking figures in the city: media, politicians, banking, tycoons, even a few from the Federal Bureau, always considered neutral ground, where no one dared to make a move, and precisely for that reason, the perfect place for an assassination. Michael pulled out a chair, sat down, his eyes never leaving me. "They think I will let my guard down. They think I will be, too busy cultivating a peaceful, charitable image to notice the real battlefield. But you know, I am not that foolish. The problem this time is that Isabella is not acting alone. She is aligned with Black Veil, a high-tech criminal syndicate, long suspected in political assassinations in Chicago. They have the skill to breach city-level security." My throat went dry. "Then we cancel our appearance." Michael shook his head. "If I do not appear, they will think I am afraid, and fear is something I never allow myself to show. I must go, but I will not go alone." He paused, then looked straight into my eyes. "You will go with me." My eyes widened. My first instinct was to refuse. I am their target, remember. If I go, it is like throwing myself into a tiger's jaws. Michael stood and stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder, firm but gentle. "You think they will leave? If you in peace, if you stay behind, Claire, you are already part of this board. and the only place I can control everything is when you are within my sight." I swallowed my thoughts, spiraling the image of a hidden gun in a bouquet, explosives in a wine crate, poison in a champagne flute froze my blood, but then I remembered my first night in this penthouse when I asked for myself what I was doing here. I remembered Michael's eyes as he spoke of loss, betrayal, and I realized that if I ran, I would become no different from Luca. Michael did not need someone beside him only to fill a void. He needed someone willing to face the storm with him. I drew a deep breath and nodded. "All right, but I need to be prepared." Michael's lips lifted ever so slightly, the first light to return to his eyes that evening. "I knew you would say that Marco and Margot will coordinate with me from now until Friday. We have 4 days." Nodded again, feeling a part of my former self die in that instant. No more waitress, Claire. No more frightened schoolteacher, startled by gunfire. Only a woman learning to hold her gaze steady among those who carried ambition like a weapon. When I left the study, night had fallen, dark clouds gathered at the horizon like a premonition, but I did not look back. I knew the coming days would be the greatest trial of my life, and I was ready to face them for Michael and for myself. The next morning, before the sunlight had time to filter through the glass panes, I was already standing outside Michael's door, wearing the simple black suit Margot had chosen, my hair neatly pinned up, my eyes steady and resolved. I did not. I need to speak for Michael, to know why I was there. He stepped out, his tie still undone, studying me with a frown. "Where do you think you are going?" I lifted my chin. "I am going to the Castellano Gala with you." Michael paused for a beat, then gave a faint dismissive smile, shaking his head as if I had told a poorly timed joke. "That is not happening. You will stay here, with Marco and the security team. This is not a game and you are not a bargaining piece." I stepped forward, blocking his doorway. "I am not a piece, that is true, but I am no longer outside the board either. I stepped into this the night I wrote that note, the night you brought me into this apartment, a moment I held a gun for the first time, and the moment I held your hand while you trembled, telling me about your father's death. You cannot choose when I am part of your plan and when I am not." Michael's jaw tightened. "You do not understand. What will happen if this goes wrong? You think I can focus with A2U? There, you are the clearest weakness they can exploit. You are what makes me lose control." I took another step closer, my voice lower but stronger than ever. "Then let me prove that you are wrong." I turned and walked straight to the shooting range in the basement. Michael followed in silence, his steps heavy. I took a pistol from the locker, loaded it, put on the headset, and faced him directly. I set a human-shaped target at about 10 meters, raised the gun, drew a breath, and pulled the trigger. The first shot thundered, then another, and another. When the smoke cleared, 2 bullets hit the torso, and 1 struck the shoulder. Not a perfect grouping, but enough to stop anyone coming at me. Michael stood motionless, saying nothing. I removed the headset and approached him. I have learned to shoot, to move, to read threats in eyes and footsteps. I know how to pour a drink to a politician's taste and how to tell a real watch from a fake by its ticking sound alone. I am no longer the elementary school teacher who only knew chalk and blackboards. I have changed, not because you forced me, but because I chose to step into your world with my eyes open and my head held high. Michael turned away, his hand clenched into a fist. I could see him battling himself more clearly than ever. At last he exhaled. "Claire, what frightens me most is not whether you can do it, but that you can, and that makes you more dangerous than anyone who has ever entered my life. Because if you are harmed, I do not know whether I would still have the reason to keep playing this game." I placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "Then let me stay beside you, not for you to protect me, but to remind you that you are no longer fighting alone." Michael studied me for a long time, as if peeling back every layer of armor I had built. Then he nodded slowly. "You will come with me, but from this moment on, you are not only walking beside me, you are part of the strategy, and if the worst happens, I need to know you are ready to do what must be done." I nodded without hesitation. I have been ready for a long time. We left the range and walked through the long corridor toward the preparation area. In the mirror, I saw a different woman, composed, self-possessed, her gaze, no longer fleeing but meeting everything head-on, and I knew no matter what happened at the Castellano Gala, I would not turn back. There was no road left but forward. The Castellano Hall shimmered beneath crystal lights like a separate universe, where every glance and every dollar handshake carried layered meaning. I entered with Michael, my arm linked with his, exactly as we had practiced for days. I wore a fitted black gown, my hair softly styled, my eyes no longer timid, but reflecting the high society world I once believed I could never belong to. The most powerful people of New York were present, from banking billionaires to politicians, masked in courtesy. I moved among them as if born of this world. My smile measured, my gaze alert, my gestures precise. Michael kept me within sight, but not so close as to reveal my true role. Marco and 2 guards were disguised as logistics. To staff, earpieces in place, scanning every movement. The music flowed gently. Glass clinked. The air tightened like a drawn wire. Yet I did not tremble. Not this time. Michael was speaking with a middle-aged man in a white tuxedo when the air seemed suddenly vacuumed away. I turned instinctively, and my heart constricted. Isabella walked in. Her deep red dress swept the floor like spilled blood, her eyes cold as the Arctic, and her bitter smile cut into me from across the room. 3 men in black suits followed her, unmarked, unintroduced, their movements alone enough to tell no one there was attending for pleasure. Isabella scanned the crowd. Her gaze settled where I stood. She did not approach quickly like a cat stalking prey. She drifted slowly through small clusters, greeting a few acquaintances, exchanging polite words, yet never lifting her eyes from mine. When only a few steps separated us, she stopped before me, nodded lightly to Michael as if they were old allies. Meeting by chance, then turned to me, her gaze gliding over my skin like a blade. "I see you still like collecting fragile things," she said softly but clearly enough for both Michael and me to hear. I smiled. "And I see you still prefer sharp edges to hide the void inside you." Isabella narrowed her eyes, her face unchanged, yet I saw the slightest twitch at her lips. Michael cut in his voice, low with warning. "This is not the place for sparring. We are here for a mutual purpose." Isabella gave a soft laugh, tilting her head. "Of course, masks are the purpose, Michael, and you know I am not good at wearing them long." She turned away, yet I felt her stare burning into my back. Michael tightened his fingers on my arm, signaling calm. But in that very moment the lights flickered. The hall dimmed for precisely 3 seconds. When they brightened again, a scream rose. From the corridor on the right, guests stirred. A server collapsed, blood spreading from his shoulder. Marco drew his weapon instantly, pulling me back against the wall. Michael shouted orders as security rushed to evacuate the central area. I realized one of the 3 men who had come with Isabella was no longer in his original position. I shouted, pointing at the half-closed service door. Marco charged that way. Michael pulled me in the opposite direction toward the service elevators. A gunshot cracked behind us. I turned only in time to see Isabella still standing amid the chaos, her gaze locked on me. With a coldness bordering madness, she did not flee, did not panic, as if she knew exactly what was unfolding and who was meant to be caught in it. When the elevator doors closed, Michael pinned me to the wall, breathing hard. "They are testing reactions. This is only the beginning, but we have shifted their trajectory." I looked at him then, at my hands still faintly trembling. I had played my role perfectly, but Isabella knew, and she would not stop. The real battle had only just begun. When the elevator doors opened on the service level behind the grand hall, Michael pulled me through a narrow corridor, crowded with hanging pipes and loose electrical wires. The smell of metal and sweat thick in the air, making my heart race. Marco was on the line with the outside team, while Michael kept checking his watch, his face taut with tension. "We need to reach the car before she moves again." But we were one step too late. From the far end of the corridor, a shadow burst forward. I barely caught the flash of metal in his hand before Michael shoved me aside, the blade sliced across his arm, leaving a vivid streak of fresh blood. The man did not stop. A hard kick slammed into my side, throwing me back against the wall. My vision burst with stars. In that instant, Marco's training flared through my mind. I stepped back, deflecting the next punch with my elbow, then countered with a straight strike to his groin. He doubled over, and I seized the moment, whipping my wide belt across his face. Blood sprayed from his nose as he staggered and collapsed to the floor. But before I could catch my breath, another hand clamped around my throat from behind, yanking me backward. My legs kicked wildly. My vision dimmed. As Vosduch left my lungs, I remembered Marco's lesson. Do not resist force, use it. I went limp, then dropped my center of gravity, suddenly driving my elbow into his ribs. He loosened his grip with a cry of pain, and I spun around. Delivering a full-force punch to his chin, he crashed onto the reconnette, concrete unconscious. I bent over, gasping, my throat, burning red welts blooming on my neck. Michael rushed to me, hastily binding his wounded arm and pulling me tight to the wall. "You did well," he said, "but this is not over. We have to get out now." Before his words faded, a voice drifted from the darkness. "Behind us, no one leaves here tonight." Isabella stepped forward, her crimson dress, as vivid as the first moment I had seen her. Only now a short barrel pistol gleamed in her hand beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. Marco was pinned back there, and as for Fend, she said, I want to finish this in a more personal way. She aimed the gun straight at Michael, but I lunged in front of him, raising both hands. Do not. If you want someone, take me. I ruined your plan. It was not only Michael who made you fail. Isabella looked at me as if I were a strange creature who, do you think you are a waitress who can shoot? What difference could you possibly make? I took one step toward her. I am the person you underestimated, and that is exactly why I will be the one to end this. Isabella narrowed her eyes, her finger tightening on the trigger, but in that heartbeat Michael drew his gun from his ankle and fired. The bullet tore through the flesh of her arm. The pistol clattered to the floor. Isabella screamed and fell to her knees, rage and pain flooding her eyes. Marco and the security team surged in from behind, subduing the remaining men. No one spoke for several taut minutes. Sank to the ground, my hands shaking with adrenaline, yet inside I felt something unfamiliar. Calm Michael came to me, lifting my chin gently. You are hurt. I glanced at my shoulder, a long scrape from the wall, blood seeping in a thin line. It is only a scratch. You are the one who needs real bandaging. Michael let out a faint, breathless laugh, then wrapped me tightly in his arms this time, not as a protector but as a man terrified of losing the most important person in his life. I rested against his chest, closing my eyes as our breathing merged with the distant wail of sirens. At last the nightmare had retreated, yet I knew this was only the end of one battle, and the beginning of an entirely new chapter of my life that night. The penthouse held none of the crystalline lights, or the low music drifting from hidden speakers. Only the soft rush of wind against the vast glass windows and the scent of antiseptic in the air. I sat on the chaise, my shoulder still stinging beneath careful bandages, my hair loose from the struggle, my eyes red from everything that had passed. Michael came in from the bath, a warm cloth in his hand, his face no longer cold as usual but heavy with something quiet and worn. He knelt before me without a word, gently wiping the dried blood from the corner of my mouth, his eyes memorizing every small detail of the night. As if afraid it might vanish if he did not hold on to it, he asked, in a low, tremulous voice, Does it hurt? I shook my head, my lips pressing together there. There was pain, yes, but not from the wounds on my skin. It was the pain of knowing the world would never return to what it was, that growing up sometimes came only through blood and fear. Michael set the cloth aside, his hands brushing my cheeks. Claire, I owe you an apology. From the moment you placed that scrap of paper beside my bourbon, I thought you were someone I needed to protect. Part of me believed you would not survive in this world, that you were merely an outsider, a variable to be controlled. I held his gaze, but I was never an outsider. Michael nodded, his steel gray eyes softening. He said he had known that for a long time. Not only tonight. You entered my life like a sudden crosswind, disrupting every calculation, breaking the cold precision that kept me upright for years. And the most frightening truth is that I do not want to return to who I was before. I froze as he drew a deep breath, almost I'm surprised by his own words. At first I thought you were a responsibility, a consequence to manage, a person I could not allow to die out of pity. But day by day, watching you learn to stand, to confront, to fight, and to protect not only me but yourself, I realized something. You are no longer an obligation. Claire, you are the one person I cannot bear to lose. My heart skipped a beat. Those words were not spoken with softness, nor dressed in poetry. They burst out, as if he had carried them too long in his chest, too heavy to contain. I touched the bandage on his arm and looked at him with eyes that no longer trembled. I once thought you were a man impossible to trust, a cold force who lived only by power and strategy. But beneath it all, I saw the loneliness in your eyes, the wounds that never healed. I do not know what the future will hold, but I know I do not want to live it without you. Michael bowed his head until his forehead rested against mine, our breath mingling in a silence, thick with unspoken feeling, not a fevered kiss, nor the rush of desire, but a deep, gentle contact that tightened the throat. The room remained still, as if allowing us to heal in our own time. His hand slid slowly through my hair and he whispered, If you wish to leave, I will not stop you. But if you stay, it will no longer be as someone under protection or part of a strategy, but as Claire, the woman I will place at my side, not out of duty, not by arrangement, but because I need you there, simply as that. I leaned into his shoulder and nodded softly. I never once thought of leaving Michael, because from the moment I wrote that note I had already chosen to stay, not from debt, but because my heart had never turned away. In that moment, amid wounds and white bandages, I knew my life had become bound to this man in a way that neither Daveners, logic, nor reason, nor even I myself could ever fully explain. 3 months have passed since that fateful night, and the city of New York still moves in its familiar, restless rhythm, as if it has never known the shadowed battles that once unfolded in silence. But for me, everything has changed forever. Vincent's, the restaurant that once concealed whispered deals and hidden power, now wears a new face. Its old walls, freshly painted in soft ivory, warm golden light spilling over. Neatly arranged tables, and the menu now devoted to authentic Italian dishes with no lingering ghosts of influence behind. Glasses of wine or cups of espresso and new business licenses, displayed with quiet pride behind the counter, and people now come here to dine with their families, not to trade secrets in hushed voices. I stand before the restaurant on a late autumn afternoon, the wind brushing against my long beige coat, my heart unburdened behind me. Michael steps out of the plan. Familiar Bentley, yet today he is not in a suit, only a pale blue shirt with sleeves neatly rolled, simple in a way that almost startles. He holds a small black box in his hand, walks toward me and offers it. Inside lie a cluster of silver keys, and a slip of paper bearing the words, "If you are ready, build a life." With me, I look at him in silence for a few seconds, allowing my heart to catch up with the moment. Michael is no longer offering me only a penthouse. He is offering me a new beginning, one without hiding, without darkness, but filled with light, with trust, and above all with love. I close my fingers around the keys and nod. No elaborate proposal, no flowers, no ring, only that look in his eyes, and that simple promise is enough. When I step into the penthouse again, this time I do so not as someone in need of protection, but as a woman who will stand beside him to build a home. Every familiar corner feels warmer. In the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee sit ready on the balcony. The small table where I love to read in the early morning waits for me. Life makes no promise of ease, but I know now that I will no longer walk it alone. This story is not only about love between 2 people from different worlds. It is also a story of courage, of daring to choose one's own path, even in the face of danger, fear, and pain. Claire was once a school teacher with worn shoes and an empty wallet, yet she used all her courage to write 6 words that changed her life. And Michael, a man who seemed incapable of love, learned to open his heart, release his past, and begin again. Through this story, we hope you feel that wherever you are, whoever you may be, there is always a chance to change, to love, and to live a life of deeper meaning. The only question is whether you have the courage to write the first slip of paper of your own. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so that more people may listen to moving stories each day. How do you feel after hearing this story? What does it awaken in your own life? We sincerely hope to receive your honest reflections in the comments below, so we may listen to the true feelings of your heart. Thank you deeply for spending your time with us. We wish you good health, a peaceful life, and days filled with joy and calm. Farewell, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.